Good evening, and thank you for watching. My name is Rachel Leingang, the co-founder of the Arizona Agenda on Substack, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections hosts debates so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. Candidates that have a contested general election have been invited to participate in the debate. The questions that will be asked this evening are coming directly from voters. Leading up to the debates, Clean Elections conducted outreach to voters across the state, asking for questions for the candidates. Additionally, Clean Elections surveyed voters to learn what issues are important to them. This survey data, along with input from the experienced journalists at the Arizona Capitol Times, Arizona Agenda, and Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun, have been utilized to guide the discussion so it best serves voters. Of course, we want to hear directly from you, the voter. So if you're watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time by email to debates@kc-a.com, text to 480-808-1814, or calling 480-937-1253. Please specify if your question's for a specific candidate or for all candidates. We screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplications, speeches, or personal attacks. The debate is scheduled for about 90 minutes, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we'll do our best. Candidates, you'll have 1 minute for your opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions. We encourage an open exchange of dialogue between opponents. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments, you may do so. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and we remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. Our candidates tonight are in alphabetical order, running for the state Senate, where you can pick one. We have Democratic candidate Mike Nickerson and Republican candidate Justine Wadzak. For the state House, where you can elect two, we have Democrat Dana Almond, Republican Rachel Jones, Republican Cory McGarr, and Democrat Brian Radford. The order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name, starting with the Senate for these opening comments, and we'll progress from that starting point. And we'll do the reverse for closing statements. So Mr. Nickerson, will you start the opening remarks, please?
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for the commission to sponsor this. I am a Clean Commission candidate, Clean Elections candidate. A little about myself. I've spent all my life working with diverse people who have widely differing opinions to come together, make progress in our community, in our state, in our nation. I've done this in several ways, mainly as a pastor. I've had churches that were 50 members, and I've had churches over 1,000 members with $1 million budgets. I've also done this as a church developer in Arizona and Southern Nevada, and as the president of a graduate theological school. Those are my professional things. On a volunteer basis, I've done many different groups. A few of them, the Dayton Peace Accords, Sundown Central in Phoenix, the South Mountain Citizens Planning Commission, and the Arizona Governor's Task Force on Values and Education. I'm retired, a retired pastor, and the reason I'm running is that our Senate is dysfunctional. It is dysfunctional, I think, for three reasons. The first is lack of integrity. In our values task force that we did, the top value that we said was necessary for education was integrity and honesty. Too often, our politics doesn't reflect that. I have always kept my integrity and would not give it up just to get for an office. And I would hope that all others would do that too. I think the second reason we're dysfunctional is partisanship. You know, there are things that all of us could agree upon if we weren't trying to score political points. And finally, and probably underlying most of the other things, is money. That's why I'm running as a clean candidate, because I think money has far too big of a process in our political process right now. And it seems the more outrageous your comments, the more money you can raise. And that just isn't the way to find good solutions for Arizona citizens. So that's just a really quick who I am and why I'm running.
Thank you, Mr. Nickerson. Yeah, I'm sorry I misspoke, and you did speak for 2 minutes, so you remembered what I said earlier. It's a 2-minute opening statement, so everyone make sure we're on the same page. Next, we'll go to Ms. Wadzak.
Hi, my name is Justine Wadzak. I'm running for state senate in LD 17. I'm running, basically, let me start with who I am. I'm a real estate agent, 4th generation. My family came here in the 1950s and helped subdivide and develop much of Tucson. My uncle was a developer. My family were all realtors. We have a good understanding of Southern Arizona and how it's been built out. I have a real love for Arizona. I've been here for 40 years. I spent 10 years in Chicago working on my career in the advertising and marketing and public relation fields. But I did come back because my son was not healthy. He needed a warm, dry climate, and I knew exactly where the doctors needed to send me was back to Tucson. My husband, we've been married for 11 years. We have 6 children in a blended family. My 2 children are, one is 29 and the other one is 20. My 20-year-old is type 1 diabetes, and he was 5 years old when he was diagnosed. So as a mother, single mother, realizing that you now have to make a decision between your mortgage payment or keeping your child alive, I realized there were a lot of issues with what access covers and what the different state agencies would do for people. Then I met my husband, and his youngest daughter is severely special needs. And we were using, and we still do use, the DES systems for DDD care. She's total disabled. And in 2016, the state actually weaponized DCS against my family. So I understood and witnessed and experienced firsthand what government oppression and tyranny felt like when it came to my household and tried to take my kids, because I caught them stealing some hours in my respite care. So long story short, I decided to run for office because I believe that if people know what their rights are, they cannot have them easily taken from them. So my fight is for parents' rights. My fight is to change and restructure and work on the health and human services area and the judicial area when it comes to DCS and their ability to be weaponized against innocent people. Basically, my husband's a 22-year retired veteran. 4 of my children are either veterans or active duty. And again, I'm running for the people, and I'm here just to listen and to take each issue as it comes and try to help as many people as I can.
Thank you. We'll move to the House candidates now. So we'll start alphabetically with Ms. Almond.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my views. I see that we need to stay focused. So this November 8th, Arizonans are going to elect lawmakers that are going to serve to save our democracy and our dignity. So I'm Dana Allman. I'm so proud and humbled to be the Democratic nominee for Arizona State House Rep. I'm going to represent LD 17 neighbors. And I'm running to protect the life, limb, health, and welfare of my family and Arizonans. I see Arizonans as action people, and we're focused, and we focus on our shared public values. And I tell folks that we've got to own that, believe it, see it, plan it, execute the plan. And I've got friends that are, you've got to repeat that. So we're going to stay focused. I take the West Point motto, duty, honor, country, seriously. I hold the West Point Cadet Honor Code dear to my heart. The code says a cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. My oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, it did not expire or vanish when I retired from the Army almost 6 years ago. My more than 23 years of active duty service makes me uniquely qualified and prepared to become a lawmaker right now, because I do not back down from a fight. I have a long history and legacy of serving in the military and in public service. And so it's literally in my DNA to be a public servant, and I will literally lose my life to make sure you are taken care of. I'm a mother of 4 children, and I want them to have more opportunities to thrive in society than I ever had. My oldest daughter is 18 years old, and she graduated from Canyon Del Oro High School in 2021, and she's currently a sophomore at Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York, majoring in musical theater. And of course, I'm biased, and I see that she's definitely Broadway bound. And we had a special moment back on the 7th of July when we got our early ballots. I looked at my daughter when I opened the ballot and went, oh my goodness, this is the first time you're gonna vote and your mother's on this ballot. So awesome. I also have 10-year-old triplets. They're in the 5th grade. And notably, they were born on 11/11/11, and they're gonna turn 11 this year. So we've got a big deal, golden birthday for them. And at their birth, I was still working in the Army on active duty, and my superior commanders had the utmost trust and confidence in me that I was gonna protect the health and welfare of others. And I've taken care of tens of thousands of members of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard across 6 different states. I'm a wife, and my husband is a physician assistant, serving veterans every day at the Tucson VA Hospital. He works in emergency medicine in the emergency department. He's a native of Tucson. He graduated from Amphitheater High School in 1985, and we've been married more than 23 years. So I care about a lot of things, like many of us, but my top priorities are protecting human and civil rights, starting with voting rights. Without voting rights, the rest is not going to get done. I'm definitely focused on reinstating.
Sorry, Ms. Allman, we're going into 3 minutes here, so I have to move on to the next candidate.
Gotcha.
Ms. Jones? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I just want to thank you so much for hosting us tonight and giving us this opportunity. I want to thank our voters who came out and supported us and our volunteers who have been wonderful and continue to be wonderful. A little bit about me. I was a business executive in Denver, Colorado. And my husband, a couple of years after we got married, he decided to become a Border Patrol agent. So he moved us to the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. We've been here for almost 20 years now. After we decided to start a family, I became a teacher so that I could be with my children. And then we began to feel called to become foster parents. So I stepped away from teaching. We actually fostered 3 children. We brought in 3 children on top of our 2 and wound up adopting all of them. So we have 5 kids, and I've been doing the mom thing for a while, which is honestly the hardest job I've ever done. But I never saw myself as a politician running for office. But here I am. My husband recommended that I run about 1.5 years ago. And I think my exact words to him were, "You're insane." And then I decided I would pray on it for about a month and felt like I should throw my hat in the ring. And so I did. And with what's going on the border, it's become very personal to me and my family, obviously with my husband being a 19-year Border Patrol agent. And some of the other things that have been affecting my family, obviously DCS reform is huge for me. Education, having been a teacher, we need some major education reform in our schools, and that is pretty much me. So thank you again.
Thank you. Mr. McGar?
I remembered to unmute. So my name is Corey McGar, and I'm running in the House in LD 17. A little bit about myself. I am born and raised in Southern New Jersey. And for many years of my life, I thought that was okay. And then I became married and we started to have a family. And I realized quickly how damaging and how difficult it can be to have oppressive taxation and an oppressive government for that matter. And what I mean by that is property taxes in New Jersey were really outrageous. It was very impossible to stay above on them. You had income taxes that were above the national average. You had sales taxes that were above the national average. And it became very difficult to support a family. My wife being from Arizona, we looked at Arizona to more or less to flee. I typically call myself a political refugee, and we fled to Arizona, and for years it was really everything that we had wanted. You had low taxation, low cost of living. It was really a great place to raise a family. But what we have seen over the past couple of years has kind of been a little bit concerning, and really everybody that's trying to make ends meet should really be concerned. We saw, rampant inflation. We see a border that is completely out of control. We supply chain issues where people actually legitimately worry if they're going to be able to get food. We have rampant crime in some of our larger cities, and it really became an issue. And I would reach out to my locally elected leaders, and oftentimes I was given a lot of different reasons on why we couldn't do something. We don't have the votes for that, or we can't do this or do that. And at some point when you have a bunch of issues and problems and you have the ability to fix them, it's actually incumbent upon you to actually be the one that fixes them. You can't continue to look at other people for solutions when you can start with yourself. And so that's why I decided to run. On a personal level, my wife and I, we have 4 children. I have 3 girls and a boy. So I have 3 girls, so please continue to pray for me. We live in Marana, and we've made our home there. On a professional level, I manage a pest control company. I often state that I am uniquely qualified to run for office, mainly because I'm used to dealing with rats. And in politics, sometimes you come across them. On a political level, I believe that there is a role for the government. I believe that the role both in the federal and state constitutions is to protect the individual's rights and freedoms. That is the main purpose, is to make sure you maintain your rights. And so that's why I decided to run. So make sure that we can continue as a free American society. So that's me.
Thank you, Mr. McGar. And Mr. Radford.
Okay, there we go. I was trying to unmute. I'm Brian Radford, and I'm running for the District 17 State House. I have been an officer, an educator, and I'm also a foster parent. Being an officer, educator, and foster parent, I've seen firsthand the effects of local and state government and the lack of resources, the lack of efficiency in those agencies. I would like to see improvements. My top issues are voting rights and access to the ballots, early balloting, and also to protect our democracy. Along with that is human rights and women's rights. This is the first time in my life I've seen the court take rights away after a 50-year established precedent. Also with public education, having worked in the schools, I worked with special education students as a teaching assistant, working with kids with autism and learning disabilities. And it's challenging work, it's challenging for teachers. And there's a lack of respect as well as funding. So the fully funding, I was excited when the bipartisan budget was passed, adding more money to the public schools. However, at the same time, they approved all these vouchers that take money out of the public schools. So one hand it's putting it in, the other hand they're taking it out. So we need to work better on that together. And lastly is water. We do live in the desert. However, I'm concerned for our future, for our water, and that we're conserving water, using it wisely. Water reclamation and reuse, we should be doing that. And there's ways that we could do it more efficiently, starting with protecting our farmers and ranchers that rely on a large portion of the water in Arizona. 70% of it is agriculture. If we can give incentives or to help them to find more efficient ways of doing that, then we can conserve more water as a state. So there's creative ways that we can look at doing that that are inexpensive, that don't cost a lot, but we need to work smarter, not harder. There's issues that matter most to everyone that we need to work on. And I feel currently the state that we're in, the environment is very negative. We need to return back to decency and integrity in our state house. It's the people's house. And we need to get back to of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's why I'm running for office.
Thank you all. We'll move into some questions now, and we'll start with something that came up in the Clean Elections survey responses. People are concerned about gas prices, which are starting to come down but are still pretty high, and other economic factors. inflation, housing costs, et cetera. What sort of plans do you have to address these issues for Arizonans? We'll start this time with Ms. Watson.
Well, the gas prices are not a state issue. That's a federal issue. So I'm not sure how exactly state representatives, state senators are supposed to help with gas prices. I've had ideas where we could reduce our taxes, our income taxes, until President Biden decides to bring down our gas prices to offset. You know, but at this point right now, anything we do, it's not going to change the fact that the Biden administration has placed these tax hikes on us the way that they have.
Mr. Nickerson? Oh, you're muted.
We can start right out by me agreeing with Justine. It really isn't. The inflation is really not a state issue, but it's not a Biden tax issue either. It's an international issue. Our inflation right now is running at 8%, which is very high. Happily, we're not in the UK where it's 10.5%. There's a lot of things that go into that, many of them out of the reach of the legislature. So as far as the gas prices, certainly they'd be a lot better if there weren't a Ukrainian war, which Putin started. But there isn't much that the state legislature can do to that. On other things, in terms of affordability, we do need to make sure that every person, and especially every child, has enough to eat. We need to fully fund all school lunch programs, for example, and even school breakfast programs. There are several ways we can help, but those issues that you've mentioned are in many ways not part of the legislature's abilities. And one of the things we need to be clear right from the beginning, there are things the legislature can do, and there are things that we don't do. And to overreach into other areas just causes problems and takes us farther apart from each other rather than solving Arizona's problems. And so I think that's basically my answer.
We'll go to the House candidates. We'll go in reverse order this time. Mr. Radford?
Okay, on the fuel issue, that is an international market issue. It's supply and demand, and based on production, and there's ways, it's a commodity. Oil's a commodity and gas is a byproduct of that. But for me as an Arizona resident, what I would like to do is just reduce the amount of driving that I have to do. And that would include investing in public transportation, public light rail service, and better public services so that more people, we can pull cars off the road. If people could take a train to Phoenix instead of driving the highway, I would be a big supporter of light rail. And that would take partnership between the state and our federal government, because there could be grants or infrastructure. There's monies on the federal level that should be brought to Arizona to invest in such things to reduce our transportation costs. So there's creative ways we can do it and answer that question. Whereas the direct fuel prices are out of our purview because that's a national and an international issue. But there's creative ways we could do it at the state level.
Mr. McGarr?
So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to reiterate what most people said on gas. I mean, yeah, it is something that is handled. It is an international commodity. And to disagree on some points, I do believe that when a new administration comes in and you suddenly can't drill at the same capacity as you were before, that does cause a problem. And permitting lacking of the permits and leasing of the federal lands to drill makes an issue. But as a general rule of thumb, inflation can be handled on a federal level, can be an indicator of federal spending and waste and printing money. But on the same level, we can do some stuff on the state. I mean, we can make the state a state that is easy to function within. It's an easy state to do business in. When you have low taxes and low regulation, things do get cheaper when normal commerce can take place. So we do have an obligation to make sure this is the freest state when it comes to commerce, and the fact that doing business should be easy here, and that will make a difference.
Ms. Jones? Oh, you're muted.
Right, I've been having technical issues from the get-go here. So going back to what everyone is saying, what can we do as state legislators, since it really is a more federal issue? I think that we need to get money back into the pockets of Arizonans. And that is with tax cuts, with tax reductions. I find it absolutely atrocious that for property taxes, for example, that someone who owns a home and they are on Social Security, they're on a fixed income, that they still have to pay taxes on that home that they own already. Justine mentioned income taxes. We need to, when we had a surplus with the budget this year, I was very disappointed that they didn't use some of that surplus, which came from our pockets originally, to put money back into the pockets of Arizonans. I think when you have, like I said, people on fixed incomes that have to stop driving their cars because they can't afford to fill up their tank, and they've started to take the bus just to get where they need to go. And they're going to the grocery store where, you know, eggs have increased 40%. I mean, we have a family of 7. We used to pay $6, I think, for a box of 60 eggs, and now it's $19. So you need to help at the state level by getting money back into the pockets of your citizens so that it can kind of cushion the inflation that's happening internationally.
Ms. Almond?
Yeah, so definitely, like everyone's saying, gas prices are not, we cannot at the state legislature fix that. That's a corporation, federal level of looking at those things, as far as corporations not try, because they are, you know, corporations know that we need these things. We got to drive to get to our workplaces and get our children around. So I think we need to look at that, because we are over a barrel. You know, we're going to pay whatever it is so we can get around our communities. But as far as looking at getting around our communities, I'm worried about Picture Rocks. That is in our district, and the infrastructure is atrocious. I'm worried about, I'm watching a video a few weeks ago of students trying to get home on the school bus. But because of the monsoon season, there's no drainage. It's like a raging river. So I'm watching children getting offloaded in a dangerous situation, trying to get to another bus. So I think we need to look at how in the world are we going to help those communities have roads that actually you can navigate, and they can get to and from their homes, and they can get, if there's an emergency, they can get help.
Thank you. We're getting tons of questions from voters, so I'll move to one of those. What is your position on the current situation on the US-Mexico border? And then what sort of policies do you think that Arizona at the state level could or should do to address that? This time let's start with the House candidates this time. We'll start with Mr. McGarr.
So the border is going to be somewhat of a tricky issue because of the fact that, you know, it's amazing. We're all running for state legislature, and you get asked to do a whole bunch of things that aren't really in your purview. But there is some things that we can do. I think that they passed in the most recent budget, they did pass some border security. They are attempting to build the wall against the southern boundary. But there are some other things too. I mean, the federal government does have purview to really control the border, but we do have police control and police power within the states. So what does that mean in the tangible sense? We have instances where we have almost human trafficking going on with some of our NGOs. Our NGOs are going out there and they're taking lots of federal money, and they are shipping illegal immigrants all across the state and all across the country. And I think that there's a way that you can start going after and targeting the NGOs that are really basically guilty of human trafficking at this point. Also, there's some instances where you make it harder to, if you're going to be an illegal immigrant, and when I say illegal, I don't try not to confuse legal with illegal immigrant. If you're a legal immigrant, you're entitled with full benefits of the United States, right? If you're an illegal immigrant and falsely claiming asylum, which is what we're seeing, and it's the large majority of asylum seekers are falsely claiming asylum. Somewhere in the realm of 90%, when they actually do go to their court case, they're being tossed out and sent back home because it's not accurate. And so when you have illegal immigrants, in this case, running all across the state, it's something that we as a state need to get involved in the trafficking portion of it, whether it's human trafficking, drug trafficking. I mean, the fentanyl that is coming through is just heartbreaking to hear the stories that you hear of people over. I see your pen, which is telling me to calm down or slow down. But I think there's some things we can do on the state level that we're not even beginning to scratch the surface of.
Thank you. Ms. Jones?
There we go. Well, I better get this question right or my husband's going to kill me. So, what's going on at the border, it really is a crisis. Some of the numbers that are being, put out there in the media, it's worse with numbers that are coming through internally. And to just have a wide open border. I know that some people think, it's humane. I know that some of these people are coming to try to find a better existence. They're escaping to have a better job or a better livelihood for their children. But the atrocities that are happening down there and just allowing it to be a free-for-all where the border is wide open, and I don't mean to do shock and awe, but these are the types of things that need to get out there. When they're finding 6-year-old girls that have been abandoned out there in the desert, and she has 22 semen samples inside of her from one night, because that usually dissipates in 24 hours. We have to start talking about those things because it is anything but humane to just let them come across. It is very dangerous for the illegals, the women and children especially. We have to have control of our border. We have to secure it. Right now, it's not even close. It's just flooding open. And so it is for the best interest of the people trying to come here and our own citizens to make sure we secure that border.
Thank you. Ms. Allman?
Yes, so I acknowledge we do have challenges at the border and solutions are not simple. Nobody wants fentanyl in our communities, so that's a big deal of my concerns. But as a mother, I am especially concerned and heartbroken each time I hear of children crossing the border alone, and I worry about their safety. People should be treated with dignity and respect. When they're seeking amnesty, they deserve an opportunity to have their cases heard in a timely manner. So the bottom line, secure the border, but we've got to be focused on being humane, dignity and respect to immigrants.
Mr. Radford?
Well, it's a federal issue. However, as state legislators, we can support our federal partners and support local law enforcement, whether it be the county sheriffs and also our state DPS. So law enforcement's going to be involved because of any criminal activity, but just the process of coming and seeking asylum, that's a federal issue. So we need to be supportive of issues that are happening at the federal level. I'm encouraged that there was a recent negotiation with President Obrador of Mexico for $1 billion of funding from their side to invest in technology, whether it be use of drones or use of cameras. There's technologies that we could do to work smarter to help stop the smuggling and stop the different routes. And that's Border Patrol, that's a federal agency. But again, as legislatures, we could be supportive of our federal partners and do what we can at the state level, which is support our county sheriffs and our DPS and law enforcement that have to deal with the issues.
Can I say something back to Mr. Radford? That I got so lost in my thought. When he talked about using our local police, that as a state legislature, that's what we have is police power. You hear a lot about building a border wall across the border. With the Roosevelt easement, that's not possible. There's a lot of border that's on reservation land,
Right.
private property. So he's absolutely, I do want to just agree that we have to use our own police power. We illegals should not be getting driver's licenses and things like that. But I also think that the illegal immigration process, no one's willing to look at that at the federal level. The expense of it, the length of time that it takes, we need to really consider that as well as a federal government, although we can't do anything to help with that. So,
Correct. Yep.
Let's move to the Senate candidates. Mr. Nickerson? Oh, you're muted.
Brian said a lot of what I was going to say in terms of what we can do, which is the law enforcement part. But also, which hasn't been mentioned yet, we have to have immigration reform, period. That happens on the federal level. But the reason we don't have it is because both sides on this issue raise lots of campaign funds on the issue of immigration. We need to tone down the rhetoric and find some solutions. And immigration reform has to happen. Law enforcement to do the laws that we have right now has to be there, and there we can help. Showboating does not help. And I think that's very important. And I guess I wouldn't say much more other than we have to help our DPS and local sheriffs and all, maybe a little more than we have, especially in the southern counties.
And Ms. Wozniak?
Just as everyone else said, this is a federal issue. Because we don't have the rights to all the land across the border, we really need to get creative. My approach to this, and I think the approach to a lot of people I've just recently met with, is we need to look at the results and the effects of what happens because of the open border. That open border has caused sex trafficking, it's caused the fentanyl deaths, it has caused crime to increase dramatically. At a time when there has been a push for defunding the police, we need to increase the police power, and we need to fund our police because they really are suffering right now. We have people coming into Tucson, into all across the state, being bussed into our communities and setting up encampments, and many of them are getting paid by NGOs, and they're affording all of our housing and pushing out our seniors and our low-income residents that are American and putting our American people on the streets while they take our housing. We have a housing crisis. We have a benefits crisis. One person that comes across the wall and they fall and break their leg, that one person gets flown or helicoptered into our hospital. They have two Border Patrol agents, and I know this because my husband works in the ER. You have two Border Patrol agents at each door for each person that is here illegally getting our health care. And I've spoken with parents who have children that can't get free health care, but we're giving that away. So then that person gets their surgeries, and then they're flown back to their country. That one person from the illegal country, legal immigrant, just cost our taxpayers upwards of $1 million or more. So we really need to think about the effect that our open border is having on our communities and on our state.
Thank you. Now, something that is newly a state issue after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. We're getting questions from voters here about what restrictions, if any, you would want to see on abortion in Arizona. This time we'll start with Mr. Radford.
Okay, as a state legislature, if the decision stays reversed and it reverts back to the states, I support a woman's decision to make that decision. It's her choice. The decision is between a woman and her doctor. It's medical care, and it should be private between her and her doctor. I don't think government has a hand in it, but I would try to urge others to support a protection, whether it be through legislative statute or through a constitutional amendment, to codify or protect that right to choice. It is the woman's choice when to start a family and if she wants to carry her baby. It's a medical decision between a woman and her doctor, period.
Ms. Almond?
So I just want to make sure that we stay focused. So overturning Roe, that's not only attack on our right to legal and safe abortion. This is reckless and it's unconscionable attack on the health care of all people who are able to become pregnant, and this includes trans men. These healthcare decisions are between the person needing reproductive medical care and the person's medical providers and any of their trusted advisors, such as family, friends, and clergy. And I just want to share just a little bit about my story, because this fight for reproductive freedom is personal to me. I recently turned 51, and now my two daughters have fewer rights than I had. I have a unique perspective as a mother of 10-year-old triplets who were born on 11/11/11, turning 11 this year. My husband and I chose to have more children through IVF, through in vitro fertilization. In this current world of stripping away reproductive freedom and with contraception on the chopping block, I'm reflecting right now heavily on whether my miracle children would even exist today. Taking birth control pills is the first step in the IVF process. And on the day that my children were born, I was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia. And I'm thinking now, if my medical team had hesitated for one moment, the four of us, my triplets and myself, the four of us would have died.
Ms. Jones?
So, well, I want to start by asking both Mr. Radford and Ms. Almond a question. What are rights and where do you think those rights come from? I just am curious what they would say to that.
Well, for me, I believe that women have the inherent right to have bodily autonomy. They have the rights over their body, and nobody should be able to tell a woman what they can and cannot do with their own body.
So
Okay, so as a, oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Almond, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a right to privacy. Lawmakers do not belong in medical providers' offices. We have inherent right to our bodies, and that needs to be the focus.
Okay, so I believe I've heard both of you at some point or another said that you're constitutional, that you're believers in the Constitution, and most people believe that our government doesn't give us rights, they give us entitlements, but that's different than rights. But what the Constitution does is it protects our rights, and I'm wondering where the protection of the right to abort a baby is in the Constitution. That's what, to me, you know, as a Christian, I believe that rights are God-given too, but I also believe that the Constitution protects our rights, and the right to life, the very, very beginning of life. 75, upwards of 93% of OBGYNs don't perform abortions because they believe that the science says that life begins at conception. So that's where my question, bodily autonomy, that baby, in my opinion, has a body of its own. And that baby's body, that baby has rights too. So that's where I just you lose me a little bit on that argument.
Would there be, in your view, should there be restrictions then on abortion, and what should they be in Arizona?
So, well, I know there's been a lot of talk lately, which I really want to debunk this, because a lot of people have been talking, especially since the Roe v. Wade was overturned, which I believe Roe v. Wade, it was decided 7-2 in 1973. And from the beginning, it was very unconstitutional, in my opinion. But I also, as far as restrictions go, the big talk has been ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. And the narrative is, oh, well, you must want to charge a woman who has an ectopic pregnancy with murder. I have a sister that suffered from probably 10 ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. And it really pains me to hear people talk like that, because obviously an ectopic pregnancy is not a viable pregnancy, and it would kill the mother and the baby. So in that situation, of course, they have to terminate that pregnancy because it's not viable. And then another thing, a lot of people like to use rape and incest, which is awful and horrific. I have a daughter that I adopted out of foster care that was brutally abused. And so that the thought of that is horrible. But that's less than 0.5% of abortions. 92% of abortions are for either economic reasons or just because the woman doesn't want the baby. So for me to use less than 0.5% to justify the 92% that are, you know, either for convenience or whatever. And I know that's a difficult decision. And many women suffer for years and years over that decision. They end up, I think 70% end up with PTSD like symptoms, and nobody wants to talk about that. So.
Mr. McGar?
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, I believe that the government has a purpose to protect rights and freedoms, right? And in the Declaration of Independence, it lists some of them. One of them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So life being one. I believe that as a government, you have a duty to protect the weakest among us, and that is going to be the child in the mother's womb. I don't believe that shrouding this conversation in euphemism and women's rights and reproductive rights, it's not helpful to actually talk about the conversation that we need to have, that this is a child. And when you say, well, the woman's body, well, if you have an abortion and you don't touch the child's body, you don't have an abortion. So it actually affects another person. That baby has a different genetic makeup. It could have a different sex than the mother. It could have a different blood type. It is a different being. I believe that to just readily discard that would be wrong. I believe that, now you said what type of restrictions. I believe that besides for the life of the mother, right, for obvious reasons, you don't want to have both of them die. Besides for the life of the mother, that it should not be a practice. It literally is taking children out of the womb. And if you were to ever actually, and I would suggest everybody actually watch, even if it's a cartoon version of it, of what an actual abortion is. You are dismembering a child. And there's no way and no euphemism that's going to make that seem right. And so they should be protected because that's the role of government.
Ms. Watzak?
I believe my colleagues have said just about everything that's on our how we feel passionately about this issue. I believe in the Constitution. I believe that our rights are God-given. They are not inherent, they are God-given. And I have a question for Mr. Nickerson. Being that you are a pastor in the Methodist faith, how do you feel about abortion when the Methodist Church does not believe in abortion unless it is for the life of the mother?
You can respond, Mr. Nickerson.
Okay, I didn't know whether I needed to wait until my turn or not.
You asked the question, we'll go with it.
Okay, very good. Well, several things. First of all, that's not quite what the Methodist Church believes in its social principles, but I'm not going to get into that. I'd rather talk about the women I've counseled. I mean, I came to this in a very different perspective. Now, I'm never going to have an abortion. And the trouble is, many of the people making the laws are men. They're not going to have to ever decide this. But the women I've counseled, I haven't found one of them who says, oh, but I just don't want this baby. It's a heart-wrenching decision. But at the same time, it's a decision that needs to be made by the woman and the doctor, not by the legislative, not by government mandate. And that's the problem here, is that we want to push government into the doctor's office for medical care. Now, you make the, I think it was Rachel who said about ectopic pregnancies. Yes, but how does that fit with her saying, well, but she believes that life begins at conception? Well, you're just taking life if you believe that. And that is a religious issue too, When conception happens, is that the beginning of life? You can get some religious orientations that is not the right place to say it. However, I believe the legislature should not be involved in this decision because there's no place for a government mandate in healthcare when it should be between the doctor and the woman. And as you said, spiritual advisor, because I've been that spiritual advisor. And sometimes having an abortion is the right decision. And it is personal to me because my wife's had 5 miscarriages and she had a molar pregnancy. And she told me I could mention that.
So just so you know, and up to 93% of the nationwide OBGYN doctors believe that the science says that life begins at conception. I too have had a miscarriage. I too have had to have the DNC necessary for that. I've never viewed that as an abortion because the baby died before it was viable, and I found out I was pregnant when the baby was already deceased. So I don't believe that a DNC, I don't believe that, birth control is a bad thing. Those are not anything that I'm against. What I'm against is anybody counseling or anybody allowing the legal abortion of a baby past conception. And so that is not healthcare. That is something completely different. And again, you say it's between the doctor and the patient. Well, when doctors are saying that the baby is actually a baby at conception, then we need to really rethink things. We also have to understand that there are many choices, abortion being one. We have abstinence, adoption, contraception, motherhood, and fatherhood. And let's remember, it takes 2 to tango. And we need to understand that there are a lot of men that did not agree to having their girlfriend, wife, friend, whoever that they might have had a play in, and it might be their child that's being aborted, but they don't get a say. And but when you look at a mother that has a baby without the father's permission, he's on the hook for 18 years of child support. So we have some ethical, moral, legal issues that need to be fleshed out. If we're going to be one way, we need to look at things the other way as well. There's a lot to this issue more than just.
There are a lot of ethical issues to it. I would agree with that. It seems to me, though, that the absolute this is right and this is wrong misses the issue. I wrote an article in the Star, probably 4 weeks ago now. It's a very complex issue.
But
it's so complex that I still maintain that the legislature is not the place to solve it.
Well, just to remind you, when 2 people walk into Planned Parenthood with a heartbeat, each have their own heartbeats. One walks out without that other heartbeat. So 2 heartbeats go in, 1 heartbeat comes out.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the heartbeat thing.
We spent a good amount of time on this topic, and we have a lot of other ground to cover.
Okay.
So, if y'all permit me, I'm going to move forward. We have another question from voters, this time about the process of voting. Do you all believe that your constituents should be able to vote in different manners, meaning early votes, dropping off their ballot to ballot drop boxes, or using mail-in ballots or voting in person? This time we'll start with Ms. Almond.
Yes, so I'm glad we're talking about my number one concern about voting rights. And I've testified at the legislature and on voting rights. And the one thing that I really focused on was that we have free, fair, and secure elections, that we must not have barriers to our fundamental rights to vote. We need to put back in place permanent early voting list. We have a lot of folks out here who are disabled people. They have multiple jobs trying to keep the roof over their heads. There was nothing wrong for how many decades with early voting, and some folks think otherwise. And you shouldn't have to opt in to registration. That should be normal. You're turning 18. It should be automatic. You're registered. And same day voting, registration, and I'm loving that we have voting centers.
Ms. Jones.
So, you know, trying to be elected as one of the two legislators in the Arizona State House, I have to listen to what my constituents are saying and what voters are saying overall. And I hear a lot of, you know, this was the most free and fair election there ever was in 2020. And the problem is, even just a couple of polls off the top of my head, there was an ABC Ipsos poll done. 30% of the people were confident in our election process. Another poll done out of MIT, only 20% were confident. So I have to look at our voters. That's, you know, 70 to 80% of voters that, I mean, even since 2016, I remember when Donald Trump became the president, there were a lot of people that said that was not a free and fair election. So I think the bigger issue is looking at the lack of confidence in our election process. And when a majority of our constituents don't feel very warm and fuzzy about the election process, we definitely need to look more closely at it. And I agree that it is everybody's right to vote. There are some people that are just very disengaged with the political process and they don't want to vote. So I don't agree, as Ms. Allman said, about just automatic registration. I think that that is another avenue that can open up to fraud, potentially if there's just massive amounts of ballots being mailed out. I think that that's a problem. But I do think we need to listen to our constituents in LD 17. And if a majority of them from all sides of the aisle don't have a lot of confidence in our election process, we really need to address that.
Would you restrict voting by mail or ballot drop boxes that we have now?
So you know, that's another thing. A lot of people like to say us crazies over here won't have any mail-in voting. We understand absentee ballots. I have two sisters that are veteran wives, and so obviously when you're military overseas, you have to have an absentee ballot. When you're severely disabled, though there are reasons to have those mail-in ballots. But I do believe that a majority of people would be able to go to a voting center on the day of and vote. And I do believe we could even offer some kind of transportation for those where it's harder for them to get there. I think there are other options we can look at, but we're leaving a big window open to potential fraud or the where it looks like there's fraud, and that isn't going to restore confidence in our elections for our voters.
Mr. Radford?
Okay, I support accessibility and access to the ballot. I support early balloting and ballot boxes. And there's people that have been using this method, both parties, everybody that votes. There's a majority that have used this method for decades, for over 30 plus years. So to all of a sudden, it's a problem when it's not. It's a non-issue because we had the election. There were, I think, 2 or 3 audits done afterward. Our Republican Attorney General, our Republican governor, certified it as being without issue, without fraud. But yet here we are over 2 years later, and it's still being discussed as an issue or as a conspiracy that the election was fraudulent. So I think the political rancor around it has stirred the pot that people are losing confidence because of all that static that's been coming out over the past 2 years. Prior to this, there was no issue. We need to make it accessible. There's people in rural areas that can't get to a polling location. or if they're seniors, or if they're disabled or challenged in some way that they can't get there. So making it able to do ballot by mail is the perfect way. They do sign them, they put their name on them, and they are verified. And there has been none that I know of that have come in as fraudulent. So I support early balloting. I support the early voting list. I support access to the ballot. Everyone should be able to vote.
Mr. McGar?
So when you look at the election system and so Rachel made a point of there's a lack of confidence with the general public in this area. And we do have to take that seriously. So when you go from 2016 and people questioned whether Trump was correctly elected, and you go to 2020 and you have people questioning if Biden was truly elected, you have to take in the fact that if people don't accept the outcome of elections, that it really damages the ability to lead the country. And so this is a problem that needs to be addressed. Now, what did we see in 2020 and other elections? Well, you saw in places like Yuma, we say it was free and fair and there was no issues, no problems whatsoever. That's wholly inadequate and inaccurate. Every year there are people who go to jail for voting fraudulently by mail. That happens every year, and there are convictions for it. Secondly, in Yuma, there was I think it was a former mayor that was just took a plea deal because she was responsible for trafficking 2,000 ballots. They fingerprinted her on 2,000 ballots, illegally trafficking them. That's not something I would call a free and fair election if you can traffic ballots. Unless you're running an orphanage, you should have your own ballot and those in your household. And if you've got 2,000 of them, that's an awfully large orphanage. And so this is something that is an actual problem. Mailing out ballots to people who don't want them, or maybe requested them a long time ago and don't vote anymore, is a recipe for a disaster. And that's verified through a lot of different things. In France in the 70s, they used to hole out mail voting. And then they realized that it was the most easily susceptible to fraud. And then our own intelligence agencies have done multiple studies on the most secure elections, and mail-in voting is by far the most susceptible to fraud. Now, why is that? I think Brian said, well, you have a signature. They stopped verifying signatures towards the end of counting votes in 2020. And that's a known fact. This isn't something that's up for grabs. So there are issues with it. The most secure election is always going to be in person with an ID to make sure that you are the person that you are and that we have true confidence in our votes. So those are issues that we probably need to work through. And just so anyone wonders if you're trying to suppress the vote, I would be in very favor of a statewide holiday for anyone who wants to go and vote, that there's a holiday on election day, and we can make this a truly American holiday. You go to vote.
Thank you. We'll go to the Senate candidates now. Go with Mr. Nickerson. Oh, you're muted.
I like that last idea, Corey, about the holiday. I agree, because too often people who have to work every day just can't make it to polling parts. But, you know, Rachel, talking about the confidence has gone down basically because Trump has constantly made it go down with his false statements, pure and simple. You know, mail-in voting, which seems to be the thing that you're not liking, Corey, it was passed in 1998 here by the Republican legislature because they thought, well, it'll give seniors more of a chance to vote, and they're a group that they're going to vote for us. As that has changed, the excitement about mail-in ballots has gone down amongst that. The thing is, mail-in ballots are secure. You ask anybody in Washington or Colorado where everyone mail-in ballots. Not everybody mails them in. When I lived in Colorado, I always took them down to the drop box, but everybody got their ballot who was registered and then could vote. It increases participation in voting. It gives everyone a chance to give their vote, their voice, And it's important that we expand all the citizens' ability to vote, not suppress it. And I won't go into all the ways that some of the suppression seems to be happening now, but the argument of confidence is a manufactured one. Because you see, if you complain about it enough, more people don't become confident. And then you can use, well, they're not confident to get what you want. I'm a historian. I know how this works. And that's the way they did it in Germany. And I don't want it to happen here.
If I could make a comment to his comments, he made the accusation that it was simply that Trump had been stating that the election was stolen. And granted, he had said that. But I do remember quite clearly the Democratic senators on the House and the House and the Senate stating very specifically that the elections were not secure, that they stated how easily machines were tampered with, and that you shouldn't trust the vote. So I don't believe this is just an R versus D type of a comment. This is both sides saying this, and that's why we need to make sure that at the end of Election Day, you have confidence that your vote counted. And wholesale.
What senators are you referring to?
I believe it was Harris. I think Vice President Harris in a panel actually stated that she did not trust the election system.
I'd like to see that.
So,
Ms. Wadzak?
Well, I believe that it's hard to go last because everybody else has already said all the good stuff. I will tell you that Colorado had a lot of issues because of them switching strictly to all mail-in ballots. I can guarantee you the Republican Party is not too happy because it used to be a very red state, and then they went to mail-in ballots and they immediately turned into a very blue state. But France, for example, had decided to move to all mail-in ballots, and they found that there were too many instances and issues with fraud. So they immediately went back to hand counting in smaller groups, smaller areas. I am a big believer of precinct voting. I don't know why we moved away from that, but we should have precinct voting with paper ballots, no machines. These machines that were in Pima County were an absolute travesty. There were people that weren't able to get ballots printed. There were people that were unable to vote. Ballots were being printed out in LD17 without my name on them. So there were issues in Pima County with those machines. But we need to bring it back down to the community, and we can, like France, have all of our ballots, paper ballots, hand counted by precincts of 1,000 or less, and have results, election results, same day as the election. I'm also a big proponent of having a holiday. I think that there are too many people that can't vote because their employer won't let them off from work. But I have absolutely no issue with letting every single legal citizen, somebody who is legally allowed to vote, vote. I've never heard of anybody saying that there are entire groups of people that should not be allowed to vote. So, but I do think that there has been a lot of disenfranchisement with the current voting system. And when you look at these voting machines as well, a lot of them across the county were placed heavily in Democrat districts and Democrat areas, but not in Republican areas. So it made it very hard for Republicans to get out to vote. So the ratios of placement, there's a lot of issues there. And it should never take a week to count ballots. And we should never be voting for a full month. It gives far too much time for algorithms to be looked at, to be cheated. And we need to just have people submit their ballots, count them, and have results that night. It just removes the equation for any sense or feeling of the election not being safe and free and fair.
Thank you. We'll move into education as our time here keeps ticking by. I'm going to ask two questions, and hopefully they both have straightforward answers. So first of all, do you support the recent expansion of the empowerment scholarship accounts? And then second of all, do you think that K-12 schools in Arizona need more funding? And this time we'll start with you, Ms. Wadzak, since I think we ended with you a couple times in a row there. Sorry.
That's okay. I just, one of the things I want to clear up, and when people call them vouchers, vouchers are illegal in Arizona. So when you have candidates that go out and say that they are not for the voucher program, vouchers are not legal. They are called ESAs, they're Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. And I am absolutely for them because no two children are the same. And so to put a bunch of different children in various communities from different economic backgrounds, different zip codes, but also different levels of bright. I mean, there are some children that are in very disenfranchised areas that are not getting opportunities in really good schools. And also, let's just keep in check the amount of issues of what's being taught to the children. There's a lot of parents that don't like the curriculum. And so there should be an opportunity for parents to send their children to a different school of their choice with a curriculum that fits their needs. But it also goes all ways. There are a lot of ways that I would think that Democrat-leaning parents should also be able to create their own school system and utilize the ESA funding just as well. So I don't know why there's so much of an adverse feeling towards this ESA program. Also, I want to talk about very quickly about the fully funding of education. The education dollars in our funding takes up most of our budget. So I don't understand how much more we're supposed to give from the budget. My issue is how it's spent. We need to really look at the misappropriation of funding within the school districts that receive the money. And I will say that that also goes very deeply rooted with the IEP programs. With two children who were on IEPs, there is my one daughter is worth over $50,000 a year. And when I would ask for a parapro, I was told we don't have the money. So there's a lot of misappropriation of funding.
Mr. Nickerson, and then just a reminder, since it's two questions, did you support the expansion of ESAs? And then your thoughts on K through 12 funding?
ESAs are universal now with the law that just passed. I've been very supportive of the referendum to let the voters decide whether we really want to spend $7,000 of public money to support private schools which have no accountability. And I can't believe some of the statements. You know, our public education has been the cornerstone of people rising up in this country. And we have to have excellent public education, not excellent private school education, not excellent religious school education. Those are choices. And you know, parents do have choices. Most of our school systems are open enrollment. If they don't want to go to one school, a child can go to another school. The parents have the choice, but state tax money, our money, should not be going to a religious school which has certain religious doctrines they're going to do, or to a private privileged academy where the people going there are paying $15,000 to $30,000 a year tuition, and all the ESAs are doing are giving them a break. 75% of the applications so far for this ESA program have gone to people who are already in private schools, already paying these large tuitions. We're just giving them a break. And the idea that we're helping lower income people that was alluded to, I won't say straight on, is ridiculous, because they're not going to use an ESA to go to a $15,000 to $30,000 school because they can't afford the other $8,000 to $23,000. So that's the ESA. So I'm very much against it. Public funding has to increase. I would agree that we have to do well in terms of accountability, but you know, where the ESA funds are going, there's no accountability. At least there's auditing and performance accountability in our public education. And so I would fully fund, we've been underfunding education for at least 20 years. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, we underfund, and then say, oh, well, the performance is lagging, so we've got to give the money to for-profit education. And guess what? When you have for-profit education, profit always trumps education.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
May I say something to that really quick?
Sure.
Because you did bring me up. I have to say that, you know, more than half of our state budget goes to education.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, you know, the different schools and the money that's going to the different schools. My daughter qualified for ESA because she's severely disabled. And there were no schools for her to go to in all of Pima County, not one that could handle her special needs. So I had to give the money back. Furthermore, there's a roughly close to 40 D and F rated schools in Pima County, 40. And did any of those schools or did the school district tell any of the parents for the last, as long as ESA has been around for years, that they all had a right to the ESA program for years, not just in this last round, for years? Nobody knows what their rights are with these schools. So now people, yes, they are going to go exercise their rights because they've been in D and F rated schools, C rated schools. We're very lucky to have Vail in our district and some schools in Marana and a few in Tanque Verde. But aside from that, in LD 17, you know, where we do have some issues with TUSD. So
Mr. Nickerson,
I
I'll
have
give you
to,
a
I have to,
brief
I have to respond to
Yeah, brief
that.
response, please.
Okay, first of all, I'm glad you said that Vail was an excellent school. So why did you try to replace the school board? Second of all, I'm not against ESAs.
okay, we're gonna go there. I wanted to replace the school board. I didn't want to replace the school board school. I did not want to replace the school board, sir. But when you have a school board that's forcing masks on children and 3 of them commit suicide and do a swan dive off the bleachers and kill themselves because they don't want to have masks on their faces anymore, I'm going to go and I'm going to support parents that want to have the masks removed from their children.
Yeah, that's the medical freedom you support, but not medical freedom for women.
And that you absolutely misappropriate both terms, but go
Yes, you do too. That's okay.
Okay, let's let the House candidates have a chance to respond here. Mr. Radford.
Okay, I believe.
Oh, sorry, to remind you, the question was ESAs, whether you support the expansion, and then K through 12 funding, where you are on that.
Right. No, I don't support the expansion. I think it takes money away from schools that are already struggling. I believe that public school funding belongs in the public schools. My issue would be the aggregate spending limit, the aggregate expenditure limit, the AEL needs to be removed so that schools can use their full budget. If we start there and then look at the whole issue on how the money is being used and how it's being accounted for. But no, I don't support the ESA voucher program because it takes money out of the public school budgets, and public schools are struggling. We are low on per pupil spending and we're last on teacher pay. So we need to do better. If we're to have a vibrant economy, we have to have an educated workforce, and that belongs in the public schools.
Ms. Almond?
Yeah, so I'm looking at where ESAs started off with the right intent for those who have special needs. But what is happening now, it is for anything. There's no accountability for this expansion. And so now we've got this situation where the student and the money are not in the same place. So you take this voucher, you go to a private school, the private school doesn't think that the student is performing at the highest levels of what they would like to present to the community so they can get people to come to the private school. So they tell the student, you have to leave. We're going to make sure in public schools that we take care of that student, but now the money is with the private school. So that is wrong. As far as fully funding public K through 12 education, that is a big deal for me. I'm a product of public schools, so is my husband, so is my oldest daughter, and I want to make sure that children receive a quality education. You know, it shouldn't be that the classes are so big in size that we can't get effective education out there. Brick and mortar schools should not be crumbling on folks' heads. And then our educators, they are not being treated with dignity and respect, and this is decades long of a problem. They deserve a living wage that keeps up with inflation, with cost of living, and they need benefits. So we need to ensure that we're doing the right things for our future, because we also have to look at socioeconomic way ahead. If we're not giving quality education to our children and our educators are not treated with dignity and respect, the children grow up and they're going to leave the state. You've got educators that do not want to come in the profession of education because of the way we're treating them. So, and they're leaving in droves. So we've got to go back. There is money. There was money sitting there last session for schools. Why is it we create a crisis over the cap of the education budget? I don't like creating a problem. Why are we focused on, why don't we make it so it's automatically that budget reflects what is actually needed?
Ms. Jones?
So I do want to say, when you're speaking of teachers, I fully agree that a majority of the money, the legislature agrees with you that 50% of the money allocated to the schools should be going to the teachers. And when they had agreed on encouraging the school districts in Arizona to pay their teachers more, to increase, actually 20% was the number that they wanted to target. TUSD, just so you know, there were hundreds of schools that almost met that 20%. TUSD actually lowered their teachers' salaries by 4% when that happened. So going back to, I do agree with the ESAs and the money. So where does the education funding come from? In Arizona, there's three, it's state tax, state income tax, property tax, and sales tax. So we've tried everything. We have 5 kids. One of ours has special needs. We've done private schooling, charter schools, public schools, and homeschool. So we've kind of gotten a taste of everything. So the nice thing with the ESAs is that you can transfer your child to another public school and the money will follow that child to a public school, which they like to stay quiet on that. But if I'm a taxpayer paying into those 3 tiers as a taxpayer, sales, property, and income, but my kids are at private school, which I want to disagree with Mr. Nickerson. We had 5 kids at a Tucson private school at one time. I don't know how we survived that, quite honestly. It is very expensive, but it was actually around $11,000 per year for each of our kids. So $11,000 in 2021. Each public educated child received spending per pupil was right around $12,331. So you're actually, as a taxpayer, paying less for a Tucson. That was one of the more expensive Tucson private schools. You're paying less as a taxpayer for those ESAs to send a child to a private school of their choice. And it helps these kids, regardless of what I believe you're saying. If their parents want that option, it's there to take their child out of a D or F rated school district and put them either in another public school or a private or charter school. And so why would we not want parents to have that choice? You know, as Justine said, I have my special needs daughter she has an IEP. She has special needs that she can't be met at a private school. But we need to make sure that our teachers are getting the 50% for their classes and their students that they're supposed to be getting, and not taking salary cuts with TUSD instead of being compensated more. So,
Mr. McGarr?
Oh, now it's my turn. Oh, okay. So, yeah, everyone has said a lot of things that were important. So yeah, I am very much in favor of the ESA program. And the reason why is, and then at the end of the day, it's the parent's choice. I know people have said, well, it's going to go to private schools, and so there's no accountability. Well, there's DNF rated schools right now, and there's not a whole lot of accountability for them either. And the fact that we should just throw money at the public school because that's where it's supposed to go is also inaccurate, because the money is not supposed to go to the school. It's supposed to go to the child and make sure that they're well educated. I think the best person to determine how is best to educate their child is going to be the parent, and who has the most skin in the game, and the one who's going to hold the school most accountable is the parent. So the idea that we need to fund DNF rated schools just for the sake of funding them, and that regardless of what the child actually learns is bad. So I believe that it's perfectly reasonable for the parent to make educated decisions on where they send their child. Now, when it says fully funding schools, to what Rachel said, I do want to disagree. She said $12,000 was what allocated per pupil, and it's closer to 14 or a little bit over 14. I think that there's a lot of issues with public school, and I think it's a lot oftentimes with misappropriation of funds. They use money in other areas besides to the classroom. When we increase our budget year after year, the teachers don't get raises. The teachers have to buy their own school supplies, but the administrative state grows. And so there's oftentimes a misallocation of funding. If you can fund someone to go to a private school for $11,000, what are they doing with 14? I think it's time that we stop just funding an education system just for the sake of funding it and start actually funding education.
So I know we're coming up on the end of our time here, but I'm hoping everyone's cool with taking a question on water before we get to closing statements. Is that okay? Is everyone okay with going a little long? So as you all know, our water supply from the Colorado River is dwindling. It's been severely curtailed due to the ongoing drought. So what are your plans, or what should the state do to find more water supply or conserve what we have? We'll start this time with Ms. Jones.
So there was a Senate bill passed. It was 1740. It was the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority bill, I believe. And this is one of those issues I think we can all agree, all of us on this Zoom, that it is a very bipartisan issue. We all know that water is critical to Arizona, and we have mining here. We have, cattle, ranches, cotton, a big agriculture community. So the dwindling water in Lake Mead should make a lot of people concerned. And another thing about the Colorado River, next year in 2023, Arizona is going to be responsible for cutting 21% of our usage in that lower basin, but California and Nevada don't have to do anything. So we need to make sure that California and Nevada are pulling their weight and doing their share. I'm actually just learning a lot about water, about the desalination, that they're talking about making a plant in Yuma where they can pull from the Sea of Cortez. I would love to learn more about that. The Salt River Project. People have talked about piping in water from the Mississippi River, but I've heard that's like a 20-year process, and I don't know that we have that much time to deal with it because it's definitely a little bit more critical now. But I think that we have there's drip irrigation, but I've heard some issues with that. It's not good for certain crops like lettuce and cabbage, so it wouldn't be an overall solution to everything. So I think we need to look at all of the solutions on the table. And, they're even looking at forestry with the Bureau of Land Management and how they can cut water usage in the forests, et cetera. So yeah, I think there are a lot of options that we need to continue to work on with our current legislature.
Mr. McGarr?
So kind of piggyback on what Rachel said. I don't think this is a partisan issue. This isn't going to be something where we come up with something very dramatically different. It's a real issue. We live in the desert. We have to come up with solutions that are affordable, that impact the people the least. But I mean, we should be employing an all of the above approach, whether it's, I've heard of the desal. We've got to do water reclamation. We've got to do better in capturing our rain. Even the Mississippi River one, which, it does solve problems for both sides. We need water and they have too much, but we really should be looking at all of the approaches that are even feasible. It's something that we have to get done, at least get a plan in place in this upcoming session, because from what I've been hearing, it's something that's been talked about for decades and we've done nothing.
Mr. Radford?
For me, we know that the water comes out of the Colorado River Basin, and there's 7 states that share that water. So at the federal level, there needs to be movement on those other states. Like Rachel was saying, California, Nevada, some other states need to step up, just like Arizona stepping up. We're going to lose 21%. But here at home in the state of Arizona, 70% or more of our water is used for agricultural uses. And the old methods of flood irrigation that we've been using, the canal structure, there's a lot of water loss. So we need to work on conservation, reclamation, and reuse, and some water resiliency to come up with some creative solutions while making a minimum impact on our farmers and our cattle ranchers, because they are going to be caught with the expense first. Second will be the mining industry, which is the next heavy water user, and then industry. We have a lot of chip plants that are coming here, server farms. They use water. They're using reclaimed water, which is good, but to run those industries requires water. So we know it's an issue. It is a bipartisan issue, and we need to be supportive of some creative solutions that do not impact our farmers or ranchers in a negative way, or our residents and taxpayers. So we need to be creative and do it in a smart way.
Ms. Almond?
So I'll tell you, I have been crisscrossing LD 17. Our district, as we know, is very big, and I want to get eyeball to eyeball with our constituents. And so, yes, water is definitely brought up many times. We need to get a plan in place. We need to listen to our neighbors. We need to listen to experts, because we can't, we're losing time. And so we know that everyone needs clean, safe water. We know that Arizona farmers are impacted with trying to grow these crops that we need, but it is a multifaceted solution that we've got to find. There's not just one way. We've got to look at every possibility and get a plan in place.
Ms. Wadzak?
I agree with everybody's statements that this is a topic that is something we can all agree on. We all need to fix the water crisis. We will be without the CAP water access within the next 8 years. And there are many people, you can imagine when you run for office, how many experts suddenly come to you and tell you all the different ideas that can be done. And I've had a lot of everything from, you know, the Mississippi to, you know, water reclamation to, like they said, drip irrigation. But we have 46 underground water basins that need to be looked at. And there are options with nuclear power that could actually help give us clean energy that I'm being told, I don't know how much this is true, but if this is the fact, then it could help us refill the basin, our water basins. We can refill the water that we're missing and actually have too much water, have a good problem. But it's talking to experts. And the problem with running for office is that everyone you talk to says they're an expert. So I think water is going to be something that's going to take a lot of diving, a deep dive into, no pun intended, deep dive into the issue of water because it is an immediate need. I want to say that we need to look at Arizona. We need to look at protecting our own state first. A lot of our water is used by foreign. We have, I think, some even somebody else has mentioned that we have the Arab communities have their alfalfa, plants, and then they're growing alfalfa on our land with our water, and they're not paying for it. So I think we need to start looking at things from a broader sense. And really start questioning where our water is going and keep more of it in our state for our people. And I'll go even a step further. I don't know why we're sending CAP water to Mexico if we're having this big influx. I would like to start seeing a little more, we give, you take, we take, you give. There's just not enough of that in our relationships with other states and with our Mexican treaty.
Mr. Nickerson?
Well, it is a bipartisan issue. And, you know, maybe this is where we could start to actually work together again for the betterment of the state. Just a couple of ideas that I would throw out there. One of the things, we need a comprehensive plan. We talk a lot about surface water, but the groundwater, and I think it was Justine said there's 24, there's lots of aquifers, but there's only 3 small districts that regulate groundwater. All the rest is up for grabs for free. We need a statewide groundwater policy and make it comprehensive with the ground and surface water. I think our extension service out of the U of A is able to help our farmers. They trust that service, and we can get better use of the water we have for agriculture. There are more efficient methods, but having had lots of farmers in our family, any change is expensive. And I think because if we ask the farmers to conserve water, the state ought to do something in terms of incentives, because they're helping all of us, not just their own business. And if we don't do incentives, their businesses won't be able to change to more efficient manners. Golf courses, I know that's a big thing in Arizona, but they could use less water. There was a big article about how many are over their allotment that they agreed to when they first built, and use a lot more gray water. Those are just some of the ideas. Lots of people have lots of ideas. We do need to bring them together and come up with a plan, because without water, we don't have a future.
That's the end of the question portion of tonight. I appreciate you all for allowing me to go a little past time, but that brings us to our closing statements. And like I mentioned at the top, this time we'll go in reverse alphabetical order. So we'll start with the Senate candidates, and that leaves us with Ms. Wadzak first.
So again, my name is Justine Wadzak. I'm running for your state Senate. My main reason for being here is I want to make sure that the people are protected. And this is a time in our country and in our lives where we feel a bit vulnerable to the government, to the various issues that seem to be compounding every single day. It seems like there's something new in the news that just is enough that makes you want to throw your phone across the room and not ever open it up again. We need to fix a lot of the issues, many of which are federal, but the state does have state rights. And what we need strong people who are going to go into that state legislature and fight for your needs, fight for your rights, fight for what it is that is ailing you and that is trying to take you down. I know that in 2021, I fought for the people and I helped a lot of them, as Mr. Nickerson stated. I fought for children who were being oppressed with forced masking in their schools. I fought for parents' rights. I fought for people who were being forced vaccinated and losing their jobs. Police officers, firefighters, medical workers, people who wanted to make a decision on their own healthcare needs and were told that they couldn't work unless they did what the government told them. I fought for small businesses, and I'll tell you, that doesn't stop. So I look forward to representing the people and listening to your needs. And I will continue to do so. That will not stop. And I hope that you can put your faith and trust in me. And again, it's Justine Wadzak, and thank you for your time.
Mr. Nickerson?
Well, as I started out, ultimately, politics is about compromise. I have some principles that are very important to me. Others have other principles, but we need to get together respectfully and find solutions that will help Arizona. I have not been highly partisan this first time I've ever run for office. And I started out as Republican, so I can talk with Republicans on Republican principles. My first activity in politicking was to do flyers for George Romney. And I did that because he was really strong on civil rights. And that's kind of been my anchor throughout my life. How do we make sure all rights of all people, regardless of where they came from, their economic status, or what color their skin might be, how do we make sure that everyone in the US has all their rights and they aren't taken away? So civil rights in all its forms is the most important thing to me. And I want to work with everyone in the Senate to make sure that everyone's rights are protected. So I'm Mike Nickerson, and I would like you to elect me to the Senate for LD 17.
We'll move to the House candidates. And as a reminder, you get to pick two on for House candidates. Mr. Radford, you're up first.
Okay, I'm Brian Radford, and I'm running to be your next State House representative because I believe that it is our State House and it should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that is my focus, is people first. I support human rights and everything that has been discussed tonight as far as preserving those rights and saving our democracy. And that's why I'm running. I want a future where my children can have it just as well as I did, if not better. And that's why I'm running. So I'm looking for your vote. As an officer, I swore an oath to protect the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona. And I will do the same as your next state legislature. Thank you.
Mr. McGar?
So again, I'm Corey McGar, running in the State House. I think what's most important to understand is kind of what drives me to do what I'm doing. There are a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems, and sometimes there are simple answers. But oftentimes what happens, and the reason why politics gets so muddy and so difficult, is because oftentimes the politicians care far more about their careers opposed to helping the people. I can tell you that this is not something that I even wanted to do necessarily, but there are things that need to get done, and people who are willing to do it regardless of the implications on themselves. I'm willing to go and make the hard votes to make sure that we as a state continue to grow. I don't really care much for special interest, and so I'm always going to have the will of the people at heart. Again, with what government should be doing, it's protecting your rights, protecting your freedom, and that's what I plan on doing.
Ms. Jones? Oh, you're muted.
Muted. Rachel Jones with more technical issues. I'm running in the Arizona State House, LD 17. Honestly, like Corey, I'm just a regular person. I'm a mom, I'm a former teacher, and a lot of the issues that really are hurting people the most, affecting them the most, just with inflation, the economy. With Justine, I also fought some of the medical freedom things, and my 17-year-old daughter, that year of having to wear a mask when people said it's just a mask, just shut up and put it on, or reminded her of a hand over her mouth because she was in an abusive home. So when these types of things, are on your doorstep, it's either keep complaining about it or do something yourself. And so I want to remember all of the people that I've met, that I'm going to meet. I will never forget you sharing your hearts with me, sometimes even crying on my shoulder over the hurt that you're feeling because of the economy or because of different things with, facing the loss of your job potentially. I will never forget that. Once I get into the legislature, I'm going to continue to be a voice for you. I'm going to listen to you, and I would be honored to get your vote in the general election on November 8th. Thank you.
Ms. Almond?
What I really want to make sure, and I'm talking to all Arizonans, Republicans, Independents, Democrats, I've gone all over again across this district to talk to people in person. And I'm telling them and expressing to them that I want to listen to them, and I want them to know that I'm a protector of life, limb, health, and welfare. I've served my country my whole adult life. I'm a public servant. I am beholden to Arizonans. I want to make sure we save our democracy and our dignity. So I'm asking everyone to join my campaign. I'm asking for you to doggone come out and canvass with me. The only way you're going to find out what Arizonans really care about and need and want is to get out here and meet our neighbors. We're all neighbors. Doesn't matter what part of town you're in, doesn't matter what legislative district we are in. We are in this together. I'm Dana Allman, and I'm a lifelong public servant, and I'm here for you.
This concludes our debate. To our candidates, thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the November 8th general election. As a reminder, the voter registration deadline is October 11th and early voting begins October 12th. All registered voters can participate in the general election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. Thank you all and have a good night.